Okay, I'm going to go over some stuff that's going on in the government that a lot of people are not aware of. There's a bill moving through Congress. It's called H.R. 127. I'll read some of the things that they plan to get passed in the law with this. The stuff that regulates musicians and guitars. It bans common types of strings and original equipment bridges for most guitars and basses. And it makes all guitars more difficult to obtain and possess through a punitive licensing and registration scheme. In its details, however, H.R. 127 is so outrageous, persecutory, and unworkable that its main function is simply to display the hostility of its author and supporters towards guitars, metal, and those who own them, and those who want to own them. H.R. 127 would ban common types of strings in use, including every string pack larger than 4 or 6 strings respectively. So 4 for bass and 6 for guitar. Anything more, then it's banned. The bill states it shall be unlawful for any person to possess strings that are greater than light gauge. So no more heavy strings. Violations of the ban would result in the imposition of a fine of at least $50,000 and imprisonment of at least 10 years, mandatory penalties not seen in many violent or infamous federal crimes, including torturing someone to death outside the U.S. or committing treason during wartime. Playing larger venues than 500 capacity would be legally impossible in at least 10 U.S. states where these if these restrictions went into effect, and that would be because of those various state laws that, combined with the federal law, would affect capacity. Innumerable numbers of guitars and basses currently possessed by law-abiding people for lawful purposes would suddenly become contraband. H.R. 127 would force musicians to relinquish hundreds of millions of guitars, basses, and string packs with no compensation. So, if your guitar is illegal, it's not like you got a Brazilian wood, rainforest wood guitar. You can keep it because it came in at a certain point and it was grandfathered in. Nothing like that for the law they're looking at now. You would just have to turn them in or dispose of them with no compensation. The bill states it shall be unlawful for any person to possess a large capacity string guitar, and defines such devices to include those that can be readily restored or converted to accept more than 4 or 6 strings respectively, excluding certain integral short scale guitars for children. Industry production figures show that there are hundreds of millions such guitars in common use. As with its ban on string packs over 4 and 6, H.R. 127's guitar ban would apply retrospectively, affecting items already owned by millions of Americans for lawful purposes with no compensation for owners forced to relinquish property that was lawful when obtained. That's actually against the Constitution, because if you look at the Constitution, in there's a clause somewhere where it says no laws shall be ex post facto, which means that if a law passes that targets something that was done before, then it's invalid. But I guess the new America thinks it's okay to violate the Constitution and your rights to own stuff, not have it grandfathered in. H.R. 127 would require the federal government to register some 400 million guitars in the span of only 3 months. The bill states that registration information would have to be provided to the State Department in the case of guitars acquired before the effective date of this section, with 3 months after the effective date of this section. But the State Department would also have to create the registration system during these 3 months. And since they'd be doing it from scratch, good luck them getting it in place in time for you to register your guitar. Then you're a felon because you couldn't register it, because the law doesn't bend. Because the U.S. intentionally does not already have a national guitar registry, it would be impossible for the government to fairly and effectively enforce this system with respect to existing guitar owners. Yeah, basically what I just said. The guitar registry database would have to be made available to all members of the public, as well as all branches of the United States Armed Forces, among others. This would facilitate private discrimination against guitar owners, including in such things as employment and access to essential services such as banking, insurance, or housing, not to mention tipping off criminals and crackheads to the location where they can steal your vintage guitar collections. How fair is that? How just is that? It also seems to presuppose that the military, which is prohibited by law from engaging in domestic law enforcement, has some role in policing civilian guitar ownership. What's next? Getting government permission to publish a song, having it fact-checked, and then okayed for release? That's a honest question. What's next? Ironically, criminals who possess guitars illegally would self-exempt themselves from the registration requirement, and under U.S. Supreme Court case law, could not be required to disclose their illegal guitar possession through registration, because that would be violating their Fifth Amendment rights. They don't care about your ex post facto rights when it comes to laws targeting stuff that you did legally and then making it illegally, but apparently we have to protect the Fifth Amendment rights of criminals. H.R. 127 would retrospectively criminalize guitar ownership by young adults. Currently, there is no federal prohibition on younger people or older people possessing otherwise lawful guitars. The bill, however, would require a license to possess any guitar, and licenses would only be available to those aged 21 or older. That could create some problems for, I started when I was 14. How would I have ever gotten proficient at the bass by the time I was 21? By the time I was 21, geez, it's only a few years later, and most people's career are over unless they become the big four, Millions of young adults, including those in the military, would become ineligible to possess guitars for their own lawful purposes under this legislation, including any guitar they already own. Yeah, big problem for a lot of people. H.R. 27 would discourage voluntary mental health treatment, including for combat veterans or victims of violent trauma, by permanently prohibiting the issuance of a license to anyone who has been hospitalized with a mental illness, disturbance, or diagnosis, including addiction to a controlled substance or alcohol. So, if you were once addicted to alcohol, then no music career for you, I guess. Anyone who has been hospitalized with a brain disease would also be ineligible for a license, including those suffering from brain cancer, epilepsy, and Parkinson's disease. H.R. 127 would effectively price lawful guitar ownership out of the reach of many of the poorest and most vulnerable Americans. It would require the holder of a guitar license to pay a tax, masquerading as a government-issued insurance, of $200 to $800 per year. So $200 would be for the 4 and the 6 strings, while production of 6-string bass, 5-string basses, 6-string basses, 8-string basses, 7-string guitars, and double neck guitars, the new production would be prohibited. But you could keep those guitars if you already own one, if you paid $800 per year tax. How would you like to pay $800 a year for a guitar that you might have only cost you $600 from Guitar Center? Think about what's going on in Washington. Where are these people coming up with this stuff? Obviously, you did nothing wrong with your guitar, so why are you being punished for the people that did abuse their guitars, or maybe they imported too many Brazilian rainforest guitars into the country, and now it's your fault somehow. That's a concept of collective guilt, and it comes from collectivism, and of course, people that are into egalitarian types of philosophies have that kind of mindset, and that's where it comes from. Licensed applicants and even other members of the household as directed would also have to undergo psychological evaluation at their own expense. So not only do you have to get evaluated, anybody in the house that might have access to those guitars, even if they're locked up in a cabinet or locked in cases, they would be considered accessible, and they would have to get a very expensive psychological evaluation too. HR 127 has a long way to go before becoming law. The bill has not yet been scheduled for a committee hearing, and it currently has 0 co-sponsors. While it is not presently moving, it does show how far groups like PMRC, rights infringement advocates, would like to go in attacking the right to play metal. So that's what's like it says, it's not going anywhere right now, but the fact that anybody even came up with that is very disturbing. And so, let your friends know about this. Call your representatives, tell them, it's all baloney. You don't want HR 127, and you don't want to have to pay $200 or $800 a year for a guitar that maybe cost you $600. It violates ex post facto. So you just basically need to call your reps and tell them that you're not going to have this, and tell them, get mad, slam your fist on the desk when you're talking to them. Say, and end your phone call with, "Don't shred on me," because you got to really get your point across. Otherwise, this is like guitar apocalypse coming up. Here's a weaponized flying V. This is the kind of stuff that is getting under the skin of these people that want to ban all these guitars. You got these. It's basically like a bayonet on the end of that guitar. Now, I'm going to guess that would probably be even more than $800 tax. They'll probably make a special category, and you probably have to have special paperwork and background checks for that. You can't have knives or pointy stuff on the end of your guitars. Anyway, like I said, spread this video far and wide. And if you think that these ideas really suck, put yourself in the shoes of people that are actually going through this already, because it's not law yet, but these kind of controls and measures could someday come at musicians. I mean, look at some of the regimes in the past that you couldn't sing a certain lyric because it would be censored, or you might end up in jail for it. You got people in some countries, they can't play metal. They'll go to jail, maybe even be executed, depending on the religious viewpoint of that nation. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. Please pass it along.